rebellion in the Middle East. And I think there is a direct relationship. Now, I do think that people make revolutions, not technology, but technology facilitates it. When Egypt shut down the internet, still people worked out a way around it. Even when they couldn't communicate with each other digitally, there was their experience where they came out on the streets the old-fashioned way. But it sure puts it on steroids, and it transmits it in a way we have never seen before. And now national newspapers, like the New York Times, like the Washington Post, they are also challenged in an extremely important way because they have been the gatekeepers for so long, deciding whether information gets out. I mean, even the New York Times with the Pentagon Papers, it was more than a year that they held on to the papers that Dan Ellsberg got to them, to the point where he didn't even think they were going to release them. Now, they've got to do it because it's going to come out anyway.
The pressure of the new media, among others. And that's where I want to come back to you, Carl. Isn't the excitement about the new media, about WikiLeaks, because of the failures of you guys back in the traditional media? You stopped doing your job. You're too much in bed with power. You are embedded in war. You are embedded in politics. You hang out with each other in the same bars, same restaurants in Washington. That's why there's excitement about the new media.
That's what Woodward and I said was the problem with most of the national press at the time of Watergate. I think that's always been true, and that's why I said that really most great journalism has always been exceptional. All I'm trying to say is that most great journalism has always been exceptional, not the norm. But I think maybe we're just playing with some words here, but I would look at WikiLeaks as evolutionary, not revolutionary. I think the point that you're making about the idea that it is supranational boundaries is the important one to make. We've had, for instance, before WikiLeaks, we had a similar Dropbox in structure to some extent at the National Security Archive. So it's not revolutionary, it's evolutionary.
But it's access. Now it's popular access all over the world. Even if it's at somewhere, the National Security Archive, who has access to that?
Well, that's one of the great things that the web does, is it lets everybody have access. All I'm trying to say is that I think that the failure of WikiLeaks to edit some of the information in its possession that might have endangered some people's lives was a failure. I think a traditional news organization perhaps would have done that. Do I think, nonetheless, that WikiLeaks shouldn't be out there putting information? Look, national security, people with vested national security concerns have been yelling, traitor, you're giving away national security secrets, whether it's Henry Kissinger. That cry has been going on forever. As Ben Bradley once said, whenever I hear the cry of national security, I know it's a red herring.
Well, let me tell you what the problem with that now, and I just need to go back to my digital revolutionary here and talk about how this is becoming, in fact, dangerous, as the most liberal of all presidents in recent memory had just appointed cyber general, 4-star general. So the territory between freedom of expression and cybersecurity and national security now is quite gray.
The race that we're talking about between secrecy and pressure to disclose has definitely moved into a new territory. And as in fact you were talking about pan-national news organizations, I was thinking this morning about the role of something like Google, which is actually kind of almost at the point where it itself has transcended national borders. In the last 3 weeks, we've seen a change at the head of Google. We understand that one of the reasons that Larry Page, who is now chief executive, perhaps fell out with his previous chief executive was because they disagreed on China and how to approach that. We have seen an executive of Google in prison in Egypt for being an agitator and a dissenter, and I can't think of any example before where an American executive has been put in prison for trying to bring down a dictatorship. I'm sure if you've propped a few up in the past.
Although in that case, I don't think Google deserves the credit.
No, and Google probably doesn't deserve the credit,
but
they also produced a workaround with Twitter through a piece of technology called Say Now, which allowed people to phone outside the internet ban and produce their work in. And I thought this is a very interesting moment because, as you say, all of these sort of tectonic plates are shifting at the same moment. And you suddenly see these kind of like really significant organizations thinking about what is our place and what is our branding and what's our attitude towards this openness and this world. And you're almost getting to a point where it's not just the press, it's not just government, it's not just the military. Everybody has to kind of have a view on this because you're all now in the same playground.
Yevgeny, the question that we think of it in terms of cyber, we think of it as global and universal, but at the end of the day, there's someone sitting on a keyboard somewhere doing something, and hence they are accountable to a law somewhere. So is there really that kind of a freedom that works in an abstract, or in the end of the day, everyone is going to be subjected to some sort of accountability of some kind?
Well, again, if you look at what the Department of Justice is doing in terms of pursuing 5 of supporters of WikiLeaks, there are definitely still physical people using physical computers in physical locations, right? So there is evidence to go after them, and the United States government is pursuing its own vendetta, if you will, against WikiLeaks. So from that perspective, I mean, we're still tied very much to national borders and national laws. So I don't think that that has been abolished. On the question of WikiLeaks itself, I think it's very important not to focus too much on technology. Yes, they've built this wonderful capacity to submit documents, and you can do it anonymously. But again, the power to vet the documents and to actually redact the documents still does not reside with WikiLeaks. It resides with their partners. That's why they turn to The Guardian, The New York Times, and others. They don't have the capacity yet. They don't have the kind of analysts that Human Rights Watch has to analyze this data. And this is why I'm so uncertain about their future, because if they really want to be a powerful player, they'll need to stop being this very exciting gig shop, and they need to turn themselves into a boring NGO, right? And I'm not sure that that's something that Julian Assange wants to do at this point, right? So I think this is one area where I think we need to curb our own enthusiasm about WikiLeaks because, again, they are as successful as their partners.
So I think it's also worth saying that actually when you listen to the editors of the New York Times and The Guardian talking about this and you read the very detailed accounts that they've rushed out books on, it's also clear to me that actually the kind of traditional media doesn't have the capacity for this either. That the physical capacity to process what's actually less than 10% of the release cables, and then actually to kind of carry on being across the story, as it were. I don't think any of the editors had even thought about what might happen in Tunisia when the cables came out. That, it's stretched not just the capacity issues with WikiLeaks, I think it's highlighted capacity issues and appetite for long and detailed and difficult stories in the mainstream press as well.
The question for governments, and help me out here, Yevgeny, is that if you do shut down the internet, if you do handle technology as an instrument of an enemy, your economy goes down with it as well.
If your survival is at stake, you probably would rather survive and suffer a 50% loss in your GDP than be overthrown, right? As we have seen in the case of Egypt, where Mubarak did keep it down for 7 days or so, right? I think his mistake was that he did it very late in the game.
Well, actually, President Bashir said that he's going to take on the opposition through Facebook.
There is a tremendous amount of learning by dictators as well. I mean, now we're seeing in Sudan that their security forces actually put up fake Facebook pages to get protesters to show up in a given place and then arrested them.
So oppositions and people and so on are using this medium, but governments are learning. So the New York Times probably reflects this dilemma. Amy, the title goes like this: Syria reopens internet access. Watch out, there might be spying on those using it.
And it's not only Middle Eastern countries, it's US corporations. I mean, let's talk about, for example, Sunnydale, California, the corporation Naris, which is owned by Boeing, which sold the the surveillance equipment to Egypt, right? That they could do DPI, deep packet inspection, so they can actually geolocate the dissident voices. This is very serious. We have to look at when corporations are accomplices to despots.
What has occurred that is so threatening to despots is the availability to reach so many people so quickly and to permeate borders and to permeate physical things that were impenetrable.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining Empire. We're going to have to wrap it up. And Columbia University, thank you for having us over. So who's the mystery man standing behind Omar Slimane? Physically stood behind the infamous Vice President of Egypt as he announced his boss's resignation. The mystery has gone viral on the web, where Facebook and Twitter pages were set up especially to uncover the identity of the man behind Suleiman. One joked that he's the angel of death. So widespread the speculation that one predicted that the unseated Omar Suleiman has changed his name to the one standing in front of the man standing behind Suleiman. Finally, the mystery's man's son clarified on Facebook that his father is Lieutenant Hassan Sharif and asked for an apology. A special Facebook page was set up to receive the apology, and some spectacular 50,000 signed in no time. So what lessons are we to draw from this? Well, first, a picture can be worth more than 1,000 websites. Second, thousands of bloggers may not do justice to a single image. And third, if you're lucky enough to personally witness the downfall of a dictator, wink at the camera. Those days come once in a lifetime. And that's the way it goes. Write to me at empire@aljazeera.net or go to our website. Until next time.
East Timor's government has declared it's time for foreign forces to leave the country. But with a frail infrastructure, is this nation prepared to face a future without international support? 101 East, at this time on Al Jazeera.
As protests, violence, and the call for political reform spreads across the Arab world, Al Jazeera's in-depth coverage of events on the ground brings you the news as it breaks. Ongoing coverage of the Libya uprising on Al Jazeera.
Afghanistan is faced with a huge challenge.
Relations have gone really sour between us and our allies.
We have inflicted considerable damage on the enemy.
The people who make international headlines.
Ultimately, the truth will out.
They want to stop this publication of information that embarrasses them.
Make time for Sir David Frost. Frost over the world. At this time on Al Jazeera.
The Golan Heights, one of the spoils of the 1967 war, home to 20,000 Israelis and source of 1/3 of all Israel's water. But what of the Syrians left behind? With families torn apart and all borders closed, they come to talk to their loved ones across the Shouting Valley. Across the Shouting Valley on Al Jazeera.